Everybody ready? Even if they would all their arguments about resentment and intelligence, those are internal, at least the solvency and not the internal impact to extradition, which would be the only takeout or ability to solve terms that do not take out our ability to solve for extradition. You have dropped. The Chris Evans says that in the status quo there will be releases in Europe because there are only charges pending against terrorists in the United States, and they will not extradite them to the United States because their constitutions prohibit them from doing so. And only changing our trial policy solves it. This leads to a release of massive terrorists in the European Union, which goes to safe havens. That's the freedom of this is an avenue for WD escalation. The freedom of is shockingly go to the question of sites where there's highly new terrains that can be stolen by the terrorist events. You've also tried to drop the surrogate that are already been stolen. The subsequent future releases would only add to the networks that are already beginning to bud. This causes nuclear terrorism, which you have not answered. The impact is still ours. The evidence is very good. It says it's causing a miscalculated lash out when the United States will attack Moscow or China because we misperceive the thing that they had sponsored the terrorist attack causes. Extinction also probably implicates their ability around sanctions to do anything because it would cause a Middle East war and cause a massive conflagration because most of these terrorist attacks would all be blamed in places that would happen in the Middle East. Also, our ability to solve terrorism also mitigates their ability for to access Middle East war because the United States would have forever cooperation with local populations. Now they say, oh, well, this is not a question of resentment, it's not a question of anti-Americanism, even if that is inevitable. You've heard of solves that because cooperation with local populations solves the resentment arguments. Or Picker and Tyler arguments of the 1EC say that the affirmative improves military cooperation between troops and local allies with the United States because he perceives as credible threats and they're able to tell us how to fight terrorists. They have also conceded a couple of good terms of intelligence sharing. Even if they win that intelligence sharing is inevitable among allies, they have conceded the plan and root intelligence theory through trial. The Rishkoff evidence says we make deals with the DDs part of a plea bargain to improve human intelligence. What they have not contested our doubt. It says that human intelligence is comparatively better than tactical intelligence that we would gain regardless because they're over-focusing on tactical intelligence causes us not to believe or care about what's happening in places like the mountains of Kabul or the regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan where human intelligence is better than intelligence that our allies get when they capture or people and find critical memos. They have not come to grips with any of this. The National Security Corps would exacerbate intelligence problems over 7. No, that's called the kind of evidence. The one says that military commissions are being challenged in the status quo and illegitimacy. The plan says a better perceptive signal. The Welsh evidence is good on this question, and your evidence doesn't come close to them down to credibility advantage. It's not a fat-wise does not implicate NATO's ability to solve for hostile escalation. It's talking about military budgets. This cross-application is clear as you can see that NATO likes drones, which means that there is no cause to credibility. Only the plan's credible signal trial solves the Brzezinski evidence and the Hamilton evidence were all drops as the absolute hotspot escalation and rogue state escalation. Look, we specifically made this cross-application with the one area that the impacts you've read in the 1 and 2, the war fighting and the drones to said about rogue states and hotspots are solved. The Brzezinski evidence says that NATO cohesion prevents hotspots from escalating and going nuclear. Probably also means that NATO solves things like Iran or a rogue state developing a nuclear weapon because the Iranian deal failed, which means that NATO is a controlling impact and solves the escalation of the triple evidence is from 2004, and it's laughably told. It's talking about it doesn't assume a world in which Britain and Germany pull out of NATO because of U.S. detention policy. You have dropped the Parker reference, which says that this will happen in the status quo. The transatlantic alliance will disintegrate. Also, even if they win all their NATO defense, they have not come to grips with a broader military cooperation with Britain and Germany. Hamilton, it's not just about NATO; it's about cooperating with the EU and our allies. They said that the budget cuts but it's not conclusive, but not take out the entire ability to solve it. They say EU shift, and because the NSA scandal, this is just talking about a tiny issue with German relations. No evidence this will spill over to military cooperation. Only the Parker evidence says that trial policy spills over to issues of military cooperation. Although we grid, a good piece of evidence on this question says that it's not spill over. It's just about German cell phone, and the EU is divided over how to oppose it because some people don't think it's a good idea. Now the hegemony impact, the affirmative improves legitimacy. That's the Knowles evidence improves our ability to purchase power globally, which probably improves our ability to deal with people like Iran and makes the Iran sanctions more likely to happen and to succeed. It's fat-wise evidence is level the 90s, and defense cuts do not disprove the fact that the United States needs to maintain its position as a world leader and its ability to protect power locally at least does not disprove the ability to solve the impact. And even if they win, the fat-wise evidence proves that the United States is never going to be able to influence Iran to develop to agree to the sanctions because the United States is not the place of the world, and that's what the fat-wise says. First overview. Case always in terms of this that they concede the out on the Brzezinski evidence that was above the NATO military, diplomatic, and economic pressure globally checks extremists and rogue states proliferation like Iran and North Korea. Now Iranian proliferation is inevitable. Except Hyman at some point one, it assumes their authors to conclude their estimates are overblown and worst case assumptions. Proliferation is impossible. It's just rhetorical. Fear-mongering also comes from flawed Israeli intelligence. They obviously have an incentive to overblow the impact. And number 2, there are mistakes in Iranian technology, which means that they don't have the physical capacity to develop a nuclear weapon. There is not a single internal link to their Middle East intervention argument. Just says that we could not with Syria proof the failed negotiations do not lead to intervention. I also don't think that is a single piece of evidence to substantiate his argument that there will be a war between Israel and rather than a first strike would have this evidence so they can actually develop a bomb, which argument indicates they can. Now, even if they win all this, if we win a uniqueness argument, the deal will not happen successful. It's also mitigates that it also serves as the impact defense, which I think is a reason why this dissent is pretty laughable. Now, a couple of arguments on uniqueness question extend the LA Times evidence, and it makes a couple of good arguments. Number one, it makes the argument that carries pushing the bill in the status quo, which ensures its passage, but it also makes a delay argument, which answers all of their arguments about why the bill would happen next week. It means our uniqueness arguments about the Veteran Amendment are able to solve it. Says the carry is urging the entire Senate of the United States to delay further penalties while the negotiations with Iran continue. Now, this makes our effort evidence uniquely more likely to be substantive. The Veteran Amendment proves that there will not be an Iran vote in the near future, since Republicans that you vote against Obamacare proved that the bill will be delayed until December next. And the CNN is very good on the question of international supporters, like 3 countries that will not agree. Just over it says that France is rebel, and says that Israel is protesting against it, and says both Arab allies are protesting vocally. This means that even if the tensions happen, they will not be credible, and the impacts are probably inevitable. Now, a couple of good arguments I will win this debate on the Worthington evidence. Guantanamo independently thumbs. We have already answered your arguments about why the bill just might happen next week, which you have no evidence for, but also if there's a debate about Guantanamo happening in the status quo that proves that the F does not perceive the Worthington evidence is literally from an article whose title is Will Carl Levin's Amendments to the National Defense Authorization Now help President Obama close Guantanamo. Says the debate is already happening. The academic received we have triple defense to this idea. The McLaughlin said the plan is popular with the GOP and specifically in the Senate, which is where the Iran debate is taking place. Losers lose his answer by things like theater and the debt ceiling and healthcare. It's not a question of empirics, it's a question of recent bills that have caused Obama to already lose capital.
All right, I will take all the cards you'd expect on both advantages and the disadvantages. Please. Awesome. I love this room. Good debates happening here.
Seth, do you want me to email you these or flash
I would love that. Seth E. Gannon at Gmail.
Seth E. Gannon?
Yep.
Should be sent.
Thank you. Got it.
Where are you going?
Sorry, where do I find Brzezinski?
Oh dear, I'm sorry. I
No,
didn't put that out.
don't worry. It's not like I asked for it in particular, but if you'll send me that, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course.
How are we looking on Nate cards? Sorry, do I have a 1NC shell for the distance?
I just put it in a different place. It's just,
Oh, I see. But will you just
yeah.
walk me through the 1NC card?
I'll just send the 1NC shell as it is to
Oh, never mind. I'm okay here. Right? Edelman is the card I needed, and I had that floated right here.
Okay.
I'm like 30 seconds away. You should go.
Oh, no, I'm good.
No, let's go. I just get in before it's 45 deadline, but then we can talk, remember?
No, I can hold it. I'll be nervous.
Okay. I voted neg. This is kind of a classic debate in one sense, which is it's a great debate to watch. Tons of things happening. People are flying. There aren't big errors. You know, like you're all doing a lot of awesome stuff. And there are just kind of a ton of arguments out in orbit somewhere. And I know this is kind of what judges say all the time, but there's just not a whole lot of like what matters more or why or. So I just to preface this, I want to say that I don't really care. I love watching it, and I just decide the debate you put in front of me. But I do think that either side gave me some way like to slice it all. Like if all these things are kind of true, what does it mean? Or this is it. You know, you say time frame is an impact filter. Like I don't really know what that means. I don't even know necessarily that it is faster. And so on and so forth. Any real thing I could latch onto where I'm like, this just makes this the issue, could have tilted this debate easily. Oh, I never did put in a margin of victory. Do you think they can?
I do.
I
Think that they can. You should be the only person in the tournament who will actively choose to say that it's a 1 because they voted to think that they were.
I don't think, I was thinking about this last night, I don't think I could do it in good conscience at any point.
No, there's anybody else. It's like absurd.
I know, it is absurd. I do
Oh
think
yeah, I was wrong for sure, but I voted the other way.
I just don't think, I am close to that, like there have definitely been times when I'm like, I say crazy things like that, but I just don't think in good conscience you could say someone else would have anything easier. Like, be like, you won 2 out of 3 battles, but like, so sorry, this was a 2-1. Anyway, let me get to the point. I've rambled enough and haven't actually said anything. I think the chance of the disadvantage and the chance of the advantages are all very small. I think the disadvantage bigger. The link and uniqueness stuff, I feel like they're sort of death by 1,000 cuts and no single one of them really works out for you. The carry is pushing it card, doesn't really say a whole lot. Their Obama political capital cards are not bad, and they're just ahead on the debating of carry is part of Obama's push, and the only way to really do it is for Obama to get involved, and he will, and so on. The bitter argument, you read the important part of cross-X, it's not really highlighted in your card. I give you credit for it because I clearly heard it cross-X. I mean, you did present it, but just so you know going forward. They just keep making this argument again and again and again that it's also an independent possibility, and that the Vitter amendment, that they might introduce sanctions separately. You need to draw the obvious conclusion from that, which is that the reason they haven't introduced it separately yet is his political capital holding it up. You basically say that, but rather than leave that as kind of the implication of it, just say it. The no deal thing I'll come back to in a second. The link stuff, I agree, losers lose, a little bit non-unique. That definitely cuts into it. Their card is not good enough to distinguish it. The big picture, they just have a bunch of link cards that are pretty good. The plan angers people, it's disruptive, it throws the agenda off. There aren't really apt cards or debating enough to push back that. Undoubtedly, you cut the percentage quite a bit, with the one link being non-unique and the other link not being 100%, but it's not going to take much offense to win this debate. Where it gets really close for the ab is Iran prolif. I think you're way ahead on Iran is not going to have the bomb anytime soon. I do think the neg wins this argument they're making with their Cohen card that if talks fail, there will be a war. I don't think that gets to their big world-ending impact stuff. I also think the 2AR has good arguments that a deal will fall through because 3 countries won't agree. I think that's very, very light in the 1AR, which says a deal will be slow, but does not really make the warrants in the 2AR for why a deal will fail. I basically didn't understand until you were saying them to me then, and maybe I understood them from the 2AC. And then your card is okay. So I think, and they have an okay card also that says deals will succeed. I think there's some chance the deal will succeed now, and there's some chance that if it falls through, there's a war. I also think they get back to their bigger pro-life impacts with some arguments and a Reuters card that says, if sanctions happen, Iran will accelerate their program, and that will cause a regional arms race. And that card, in the 2AR, I feel like you put the onus on me a bit to be like, point to the neg card that is not dependent on them getting the bomb. You know, you don't go through every app scenario. You kind of say they're dependent on Iran getting the bomb. Well, that one isn't. And I kind of double-checked that against the card. So no question, this is not nearly as scary if Iran is a ways from getting the bomb. But I do think there's a chance of a regional or even bigger cascading war. And I do think there's a decent chunk of liquid uniqueness. Terrorism, I think the neg is ahead on cards and debating on conventional attacks are far more likely than nuclear attacks. I also think I can piece together answers to this from your cards. They do make this analytic from the cross-X to the 1NC to the neg block to the 2NR that says attacks in Europe are irrelevant to big U.S. retaliation impact. And that analytic, although very dinky, is just super clear, and I do think in a way, when you kind of give up the ghost late in the debate on whether there will even be an attack in the U.S., it seems in the 1AR and 2AR that we're talking about a safe haven and an attack on London, and I'm not sure, and then you explain the impact as U.S. will strike Russia and China. Yeah. For what sort of a silly analytic by the neg, all you're debating plays into it in a way, probably accidentally. So I'm honestly just not super worried about terrorism. On the credibility advantage, I came close on detention as a legal prohibition on cooperation will make NATO irrelevant. I think that card's only okay. It's hard for me to distinguish the reasons why they're angry about detention from the reasons they're angry at the NSA, but I think you have an excellent card that says NSA is not that big a deal. I think the neg ends up doing a lot. I didn't expect this, but I think the neg ends up doing a lot on NATO is resilient. Your big answer, NATO is resilient, is that doesn't assume a world where Britain and Germany pull out. And I think what they're saying, what their cards say is nobody is going to leave NATO over policy differences. And so like, when I saw it as they say NATO is going to survive forever, and you say not if half the countries leave, you know, or the big countries leave, when I heard those arguments, I was like, well, obviously the app is right. If Britain and Germany leave, NATO is done. And then when I kind of gave a fair hearing to the neg's arguments, they were all warrants why nobody's leaving. People are too invested in it. Past policy differences haven't done it, and so on. And I thought the neg had a little bit of a evidence advantage there too. And then some death by 1,000 cuts, NSA, which is very similar to the plan. And you have an excellent card that says NSA is not that big a deal, but I wish the neg had said all the reasons it's not that big a deal also kind of apply to their 1AC card about detention. So running up against the decision deadline, I just had not really written out or organized my thoughts, but that's where I stand. I do think there's a risk of an Iran impact. I think the risk of both advantages is very low. I'm not all that afraid of terrorism, and I think NATO is unlikely to crumble. There's some risk, but there's also some slightly larger risk of the disadvantage, and I don't think there's a big risk of anything.
Can I ask a question about the Iran impact?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if they don't win that Iran pro happens, their other internal link is like, even if deals don't happen, U.S. would intervene. Do you like agree with the like should-would distinction in the argument that like Syria proves that we wouldn't militarily intervene?
I do. I will say first that I think your evidence of your debating gets you way ahead on Iran will not have a bomb they can push the button on anytime soon. I do, it just depends on what you mean by proliferate. I do think that they are going to be running this, they're going to be running the centrifuges. I think they have some pro-life impact to that. Because other countries will then pick up the ball and run with it. But I agree that the card says could, Syria proves we won't, is what I have in the 1AR. In the 2AR, I have a clear extension of the card says could, which, yes, reduces it quite a bit. I'm not trying the Syria argument clearly in the 2AR, although I kind of have it in mind anyway, because it's just true, it just makes sense. Yes, I do think that cuts down the probability on that impact quite a bit.
Okay, so is that's not the impact that you voted on, right? You voted on pro-life will happen even if it's not make it in nuclear weapon.
Yes, although I think even a reduced risk of U.S. intervention that contributes some risk of a regional arms race with a big impact, and some risk of U.S. intervention with it means something but a smaller impact. Those two things are more than what's left of the case. So let me put it differently. If the U.S. intervention impact did not exist, I would have pushed my luck with the decision deadline, and I think I still would have voted nay.
Yeah.
But it definitely contributes something to feeling like, I just think the neg, and one thing my decision just didn't make clear because it was a little meandering, is I just think the neg on the case is bringing a lot of heat. I mean, I think like, is there something to this NSA argument? Yes, especially when I compare it doesn't matter to why your case matters. Is there something to warming proves Europe is not an important partner and they're just not what they used to be? Yes, now do you cards against that? Sure, but like, it's a big body blow to the advantage. Is there something in NATO resilient? I think that's the big one. And so on. And on terrorism, it's like, they're not, they don't want to do it. They're not going to be able to do it. They're too weak to do it. Safe havens is not what gets you retaliation impact. Oil dependence, I kind of agree with the 2AR's characterization that you clearly go to the oil dependence argument, and then I'm like, what was the big answer? And the other thing I didn't say that I thought about during the decision is in the 2AR, you sound really good saying like, all right, they dealt with resentment, but they didn't deal with create safe havens. You sort of made that link independent, which sounds great, but the 2AR is kind of right. If all the resentment stuff is inevitable, you did say that is a key link to terrorism.
So I thought in the 2AR, the way Nasty explained it was like, a resentment is an internal link to solvency for terrorism, but it's not an internal link to the impact. So even if they win resentment inevitable, that doesn't make the impact inevitable.
I then just don't understand how if global resentment is inevitable, how do we ever solve it? Early in the debate, the app was clear that resentment is important for one reason or the other. Either having resentment is going to cause an attack, or getting rid of resentment is necessary to stop attacks.
I agree with the second portion, but
And
I
then,
think there's an impact to resentment leads to an attack.
as I understand it in the constructives, I don't know how we stop global terrorist networks if we're not getting intel for people because of resentment.
Do you think that the...
Like, even if it's safe havens in Europe, I do think the app early on says we got to get intel from people.
Okay, fair enough.
Maybe that's an optical illusion by the neg, but when the neg links that as like a alternate causality,
yeah.
when the neg describes it as different independent links, they're kind of activating to the advantage. That isn't their word, but that does coincide with how I see it.
Do you think that the arguments about like, I guess I have two questions about terrorism.
Yeah.
What did you think about the arguments that the app improves on the ground intelligence and this Dahl evidence that says that like over-focus on tactical intelligence fails if we improve our on-the-ground intelligence? That's like...
Yeah, I just don't... I think that when they, through oil dependence and other things, make clear that, not in Europe necessarily, but globally, people are not going to help us. And earlier in the debate, I understood the app saying local population intel gathering is key. And then he in the 2NR very clearly says, even if their impact is not Europe, it's beating the global network. That, he makes this global networks are key.
Would you have been persuaded, I heard the 2NR say the words like resentment is inevitable and causes inevitable terrorist attacks. Would you have been persuaded by conceding that and saying only intelligence sharing solves the impact?
Maybe. I just think it's really tough. When at the beginning of the debate, you're like, when the 1AC says, we got to get intelligence from allies, we got to get intelligence from local populations, and we got to shut down these safe havens. Are you saying we have to do one of those three things, and then we're totally safe? Are you saying that it's a question of probability, and there's always some risk of terrorism, but your impact calculus is saying we got to cut it off whenever we can? Is it true that if you don't solve one of those things, we're now definitely in trouble? I just need a lot more. I just got the neg is teaching me a little bit how to think about those links, and I just need some explanation of what's necessary and what's sufficient to use the kind of.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, sorry. I have a couple other little advice ideas, but
yeah. So I guess like 2AR strategy post 2NR. I mean, this debate's obviously like there's obviously like a winning strategy. I feel like.
I think either rebuttal, particularly the 1AR, but the 2AR too, would benefit from narrowing down on the case. They just have so much defense on each advantage that doubling up time on one advantage, kicking the other, and winning a higher risk of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Can I ask you a question about, do you agree that the terminal impact to NATO, like NATO solves escalation, is like an argument that we're winning?
Well, it depends on what you mean by winning. I don't necessarily think there's a link to NATO collapse, and I don't think the NATO solves hotspot cards really says anything.
Okay, that's.
Which they don't really say. It doesn't say anything. You know, it's like the
I'm
classic.
just saying, like in debate context, do you think that we're winning like that terminal impact? That if we get access, I'm just saying we could have like conceded NATO resilient and then NATO checks conflict escalation and just go try or die.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I could not explain to them right now how NATO stops Iranian or broader Middle East proliferation. So I think I need one of two things. I either need an explanation from you all analytically what NATO is going to do that fixes that, or I need to be able to go to your card and see it in there. You know, if you say it solves hotspots, it solves escalation.
I feel like the 1AC part says that. It talks about like Middle East, rogue states, proliferation.
It's through, well, anyway, I did not give this a whole lot of thought because I don't think that's going to make the NATO collapse, and so I will answer your question, I'll try it out in a second. But I did not understand, based on the debating alone, so the argument is that, because I did understand you say it contains hotspots, so I assumed it like deterred escalation, but your argument is like NATO as a presence is so intimidating that Iran changes their calculations. When they're doing a lot of debating on how Iran reacts to negotiations or sanctions, you know, I just think their link into Iran is explained a fair amount. And I think you have a separate link into Iran with NATO potentially. But it is another link that kind of has to be explained and taught to me. And just like the burden is on them to explain, like, what is it that interacts with NATO or with Iran. And
yeah, I guess I'm not asking about this debate in particular. I'm asking in a different way. Like in the 1AR, for example, when you said condense, could we have conceded NATO resilient, explained why NATO solves Middle East conflict, and then just gone for Terry?
Yes, I do think if you can, I think that conceding resiliency, giving me more on, I kick an advantage, and then I think that is a way to, as you're kicking it, get something out of it. I think that's a very nice idea. I just think the basic issue is simpler, which is kick one of the two advantages, decisively win the other against all the defensive arguments in the neg block. Your time trade-off kicking an advantage is great there, and spend way less time on T in the wire. I mean, just like indefinite detention, you prohibit it, because now it's not indefinite. You just like have me at the word go there. It didn't really make sense from the 1MC on. The cross-sex is brutal. I would just say, we meet, topic says indefinite detention, they now get trials. It is about time frame. Then read that one card you read, and 10 seconds later you're on, you kick an advantage, and suddenly you have 245 for an advantage and 245 for the disadvantage. And you're not, everyone's debating well, it's just kind of like, how do I stack these things up against one another? And that's the big 2AR advice, is you just have to speak to me a little bit more on what matters more. You know, I would think that if I was coaching you here, just giving advice, I would say those first sentences of, the first thing you're saying in the 2AR is, even if all resentment is inevitable, that is about solving terrorism, doesn't take up the impact for solvency. We're just like so in the weeds right away. You know, it just has to be, especially in the 2AR, and especially if you narrow down, you have the time to say to me, you know, I just like, what is it about, like, whether it's, why should I be more worried about this impact? Is it that there's always a risk to terrorism? Is it that if Iran's not going to get the bomb? You know, even just like things, even just rhetorical things about if Iran's not going to get the bomb, you're less worried about it. And so are other countries in the region. You know, like, don't pull out one sentence from a card that talks about, you know, just a little bit more like, a little bit more teaching me how to decide the things that are in front of me, I think, if that makes sense. And narrowing down a little bit on the disad too. You know, if you go to the disad and you say, you look at me and you say, there are 3 fundamental flaws with the disad. 1, Iran is not going to get the bomb. Crush their cards like you did, you win that argument pretty decisively. Then say, what were their impact arguments? They had this one, that was linked to this. They had this one, that was linked to that. They had this one that seems independent of that, but has other crippling problems about Syria. They had this one that seemed independent of it, but had this issue. Then be like, second fundamental flaw. as opposed to like, here's a little bit of carry pushing down, here's a little bit of bitter, here's a little bit of, but anyway, please take all of that as like constructive, you know, because I don't want to be too critical, because I did think this was a sort of awesome throwdown both ways, flying along, doing good high-tech debating with a bunch of strong cards. So,
Any other place in the webinar that I could be doing better?
I would think we would like more on deal will succeed. Well, first we just have to do more on yes, Iranian vote. Most of the impact cards you're reading say if Iran gets the bomb, it would be bad. We need more cards on they will get a bomb. And then also on the impact thing, I think more cards with the deal will succeed. But if you had one great card I could look at that says Iran is on the way to a bomb and fast, the dissad is suddenly much, much bigger than the case.
When you say deal will succeed, is that in terms of like U.S. diplomacy will succeed in deterring Iran,
or like the status quo is going to bring everything to a happy resolution? Your argument is saying that sanctions would be bad, but they're kind of right that if there's no real way out of this now, so I would give me a little bit more like even a muddled status quo is better than clearly bad sanctions. Just so that argument becomes less relevant, and then say, and the status quo is good. Card. So, sorry for talking so much. Fun debate. I enjoyed it. Sorry, USC. Congratulations. Good luck. Sorry. Absolutely. You want to walk and talk in the beautiful.